Okay, Jay Gelb.
Warren, this question is on Berkshire's intrinsic value. In the annual letter, you appear to strongly signal that Berkshire shares are undervalued, especially relative to intrinsic value. Aside from share buybacks, what actions can Berkshire take to narrow the discount between the current share price and intrinsic value? For example, would you ever consider an IPO of Berkshire's individual operating units?
The answer to the last part is no. But I think we try to explain. My guess is I've never seen an annual report that uses the term intrinsic value or even talks about the intrinsic value of its units or business as much as Berkshire does. So Charlie and I really devote considerable effort to explaining which of our businesses, where there's really a significant discrepancy between what carrying value is, or book value, call it carrying value, and the true value or the intrinsic value of the business. And I got very specific in the case of GEICO in the past year, for example, and I said that GEICO, which is carried at about $1 billion over tangible assets, may be worth as much as $20 billion over tangible assets. And I wouldn't be surprised if 5 years or 10 years from now that figure itself will be a lot larger. So we've talked about it. We've said we are willing to buy, not only willing, but eager to buy stock at 120% of book value. Well, with book value being close to $230 billion now, that obviously means we think that at $45 billion roughly over that figure, we are getting a bargain in relation to intrinsic value. But we're never going to try and put out an exact number because we don't know an exact number. And it changes from day to day, and although not a lot day to day, but it certainly changes, over the quarters and over the years. And the second reason is if you ask Charlie and me to write down a figure as we sit here as to the intrinsic value of Berkshire, we'd probably be within 5% of each other. But we probably would not be within 1% of each other. So we will continue to try to give shareholders information about the important units. The small ones are not unimportant to us, but they do not have a big impact on the overall intrinsic value. We've got a few businesses. I mean, we'll have some businesses that may be carried at a few $100 million that might be worth $1 billion or maybe $2 billion even, but that isn't where the big undisclosed by the balance sheet values are. They're in the railroad, they're in the insurance business, they're in our utility business there, and they add up to some pretty big numbers. We try to tell you exactly the numbers and use the words that we use when we're thinking about those businesses ourselves in terms of estimating their value. But we don't want to go further than that. The 120% obviously is a loud shout out as to a figure that we think is very significantly below intrinsic value, or we wouldn't use it to repurchase shares. We only believe in repurchasing shares when we can do so at a significant discount from intrinsic value. Some companies talk about, Coca-Cola does, they talk about buying in shares to cover options. That actually isn't the best reason to buy in shares. I mean, the stock could be overpriced, and even though you issued it on options, you shouldn't be buying it in. But that's become sort of a mantra throughout corporate America, that if you buy shares to cover the option exercises, that you've negated the dilution to shareholders. But again, if you buy shares, if you buy a dollar bill for 90 cents, you're doing your shareholders a favor, and if you buy it for $1.10, you are doing them no favor at all. Charlie?
Well, I don't believe we've ever wanted to get the stock way over intrinsic value so that we can issue it to other people and get an advantage for ourselves and a disadvantage for them. And I think the people that want the stock up very close to intrinsic value or higher really want egg in their beer. It's okay if it's a little below. And we're not in the game of ballooning our stock up as high as we can get it so we can issue it, more of it at a profit to ourselves. I think over the long term, our system will work pretty well, and I think the stock will eventually go above intrinsic value whether we like it or not.
Yeah. But we really watched a lot over the years of certain managers attempting to get their stock to sell for way more than it was worth so they could use it to trade for other companies. I mean, that was all the rage in the late 60s. One of the reasons I wound up my partnership was that activity was going on so much, and it affected all other values. And it was really a game, and it was a game that some people played sort of halfway honestly, and other people really cheated like crazy, because if you're trying to get your stock to be overpriced, you're very likely to cheat on your earnings and cheat on projections, cheat on everything. And it works, incidentally. It doesn't work indefinitely, but it works. Some companies whose names you know were to some extent built on that principle. That's a game that we not only don't want to play, we really found it very distasteful, because we saw a lot of these people in action. And it comes in waves, and we don't want to come close to playing it. Unless I'm careful, Charlie will name names, so we better move on to shareholders.
Es muy común esta pregunta que le hacen a Warren acerca de la diferencia entre el precio de las acciones de Berkshire y si se alejan de lo que él considera que es valor intrínseco. Supongamos que el precio, pues le llamaremos valor extrínseco, ¿no? Que es a lo que se comercia el día anterior, el precio de las acciones. Y luego tenemos como una banda que se conoce como valor intrínseco, que tiene varias formas de calcularse. Entonces ellos tienen una forma de calcularlo basado en los flujos descontados, pero aquí la pregunta es qué usas como tasa de crecimiento de las proyecciones hacia el futuro y también qué usas como tasa de descuento. Ahí es donde siempre hay discrepancias, pero si dos personas ven las cosas más o menos de la misma manera, como Warren y Charlie, por eso dice, podríamos tener discrepancias del 5% de lo que sería el valor intrínseco de la empresa, pero nunca va a ser del 1% porque los dos vemos el mundo de forma diferente, aunque estemos sentados y hayamos sido socios durante décadas, ¿no? Y el otro valor que él usa es el valor contable. Entonces dice él, mi número de valor intrínseco de Berkshire es tanto, pero sí él indica en la carta que el precio está diferente al valor intrínseco, que el valor intrínseco, por ejemplo, en este caso es mucho mayor que el precio. Entonces él está diciendo que están en una situación de ganga y que vale la pena recomprar acciones de Berkshire con el dinero que tienen en efectivo, porque además de que la dilución empieza a ser menor porque hay menos acciones de Berkshire, significa que si tú eres dueño de una acción vale más simplemente por la recompra de las acciones. Y entonces justo está diciendo que el motivo de hacer una recompra de acciones no es para cumplir con los planes de opciones de compensación para los directivos, sino porque se hace más sólido el valor por acción de lo que tú tienes, ¿no? Y entonces él dice, ya les he estado dando indicios de, por ejemplo, que nuestro negocio de Geico, aunque tú tengas un valor contable, es muchas veces más el valor intrínseco del negocio de aseguradoras que el valor contable. Y dice, te lo doy de los negocios que considero que son importantes, porque si te doy un valor intrínseco de los negocios pequeños, aunque para nosotros puedan ser muy grandes, de $1,000 millones, en realidad no, son insignificantes para el tamaño de Berkshire Hathaway. Entonces dice él, realmente los importantes son el valor intrínseco que puedes calcular de forma individual, no sé, en el negocio de los trenes o de los servicios públicos o de la aseguradora, y que con eso tú ya te puedes dar una idea más o menos de que, o sea, en la opinión de Warren Buffett, el valor intrínseco de Berkshire es muchísimo mayor y espera que crezca más durante los siguientes años, y que si varía un poco el precio de la acción o que parece que está bajo, pues en realidad es una oportunidad para comprar más acciones de Berkshire.